Would you like to learn how to make this fast, fresh, and easy corn and tomato chowder for your family's dinner tonight? Stay tuned to the next episode of Hilltop Stovetop. Hello and welcome back to Hilltop Stovetop, the show where we're teaching you how to make great meals in an ordinary kitchen. Today we're going to be making corn and tomato soup, or chowder actually. And I saw this recipe and it reminded me a lot of a recipe that my mom used to make that was so incredibly easy. All she would do is take a can of creamed corn, a can of, fill the can up with milk. She might add in some onions and celery, and some salt and pepper, but at least it was something fast and warm for us. We're going to make this a little bit fancier, but it's still going to be, it's going to be even better, of course. So we're starting off, I've got just a little bit of butter in the bottom of the pot here. I'm using the Instant Pot, not because we need to make it pressure cooked, but because it's just handy, a handy thing for doing the filming, particularly when it's something like soup. And I'm going to add in, I've got about a cup and a bit of diced onion here. And so we'll cook that until it is just translucent, and then we'll start adding a few more things. All right, so we've got our onions almost cooked all the way, and I'm going to add in about a cup of chopped celery. Now, this particular bunch of celery is actually frozen celery. And those of you that have been watching my videos for a while know that if I have leftover mushrooms, I slice them up and I throw them in the freezer to put into cook things. And I do the same thing with celery. So if I have a head of celery and I've used maybe half of it or whatever in a recipe, and I've got a bunch left over and I know that I'm not going to be using it for a while, rather than letting it sit in the drawer and get all wilty, I just continue on, chop up the whole works, throw it on a cookie sheet in the freezer, let it freeze, and then take it off the cookie sheet, put it in a plastic bag. And it's perfectly good when you're doing things where you're going to be cooking it up anyway. So we're going to add in that cup of chopped celery. And then another thing out of the freezer is some chicken stock. So going back to the video about the apricot chicken, when I cut up the chicken, there was the backbone that was left and the breastbone that still had a little bit of meat on it. And remember I said I was going to boil those up and make a little bit of stock. Well, that's what I've done here. So we're taking that little bit of stock, we're going to add that in. And we're going to add in a bay leaf. And bay leaves do two things. If you're cooking with meat, they are going to add up, they're going to help with the tenderizing, but they also add a lot of flavor. Remember that we want to leave it whole so that we can take it out at the end, because a bay leaf is something that you don't leave in because you can't really digest it. It doesn't soften up with cooking. So and then the last thing we're going to add in here is I've got some potatoes that I've chopped up and pre-cooked. About 3 cups of those. We're going to add that in. And we're going to let this simmer for about 20 minutes before we add in the rest of the ingredients. Now, just a little note here, the only meat-related thing that we've got in here is the chicken stock. So if you wanted to make this a vegetarian dish, quite all right, just put in vegetable stock instead of the chicken stock, and that will work. So we're going to let this simmer for about 20 minutes, and then we'll see you for the finalization of this. Okay, so we're just off of the 20 minutes. As you can see, it is getting quite thick. The potatoes have settled down in there, so we're going to take out our bay leaf. And then the recipe at this point says to take about 1/3 of this out, put it in the blender and puree it. And the reason you would do that is that's what's going to thicken it up, rather than adding extra flour or something to thicken this up. by pureeing it, you're using the potatoes to be your thickener. But what I'm going to do instead of that is I'm just going to use my stick blender here and just puree some of it. We want to leave still some chunks in there, and this is just a matter of your personal preference, how much you want to, how thick you want it to be. So now we're going to add in the rest of our ingredients, which is 1.5 cups of frozen corn. Now, we are coming up to corn season fairly shortly. So if you were making corn on the cob for family dinner and you had extra pieces left over, rather than putting it in the fridge so that you can throw it away later, just take a knife, cut the kernels off, doesn't matter if it's fancy or not, and throw that in a baggie in the freezer, and then you'd have it perfect for a thing like this. And the next thing we're going to add is 1.5 cups of diced tomatoes. Again, I got kind of overzealous with the fresh tomatoes that I'd bought, so we're going to add that in. You can use canned tomatoes for this if you wish. And then we're adding 1.5 cups of milk. And we're going to add this in we want to make sure the tomatoes are incorporated well, because we don't want the acid from the tomatoes curdling the milk as we do this. So we're going to add this in slowly. And if you wanted to make this a little bit more hearty, you could add in some leftover chicken, or you could even add in some shrimp and salmon or some leftover fish, make a seafood chowder out of it. There we go. So now I'm going to add in a little bit of salt. And a little bit of pepper. And the heat is still on this, so because we want to get the corn and the milk warmed up. But once that's warmed up, then dinner's ready. But we are going to have a little taste just to make sure I didn't leave anything out. And you know what? It needs a little more salt. But you don't put the salt in earlier on in the process, because in the cooking, as it reduces, if you seasoned it right at the beginning, the moisture coming off of that would reduce the volume, and then you'd end up with a soup that was too salty. Okay, so there we have it. Pretty quick dinner. And I'm going to serve this up. The tomatoes are optional if you're somebody that has an allergy to tomatoes or something like that, but it does add something to the appearance, just like what I'm going to do now is going to add to the appearance of this, and that's just, I'm going to put a little sprinkle of parsley flakes on the top of that. Another few weeks and I'll have fresh parsley out of the garden, but so far not yet, so we're dealing with the dry. So there we have it, corn and tomato chowder. Took us less than half an hour to make this, and a good hearty dinner for you. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Hilltop Stovetop, and that you'll remember to like and subscribe, and we will see you again soon. Bye-bye for now.